I don't really believe in ghosts, or at least I didn't. I used to roll my eyes whenever friends told stories about haunted houses or cursed objects. To me, death was final, absolute. My uncle always said the same thing while he was alive. The dead don't bother us. It's the living you need to watch out for. That was years ago. He's been gone 7 years now. And yet, 2 weeks ago, I answered his call. It was a Thursday night, one of those long work days where the hours blur together. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cold plate of leftovers, scrolling aimlessly through my phone when it buzzed. At first, I didn't even glance at the screen. My brain just went on autopilot. But then the sound of the ringtone cut through me because it wasn't my normal ringtone. It was his. My uncle had this annoying old Nokia back in the day, and whenever he called, my phone somehow synced to his distinctive, tinny ringtone. A glitch, I guess. After he passed, that ringtone disappeared, and I hadn't heard it in years. Until that night. My hand froze over the screen. The name glowing against the black display was impossible. Uncle Ray. I laughed nervously, convincing myself it had to be some kind of scam, maybe a recycled number. Numbers get reassigned all the time, right? I told myself not to pick up. I told myself to just let it ring and block the caller. But curiosity has this way of drowning out reason. I swiped to answer. Hello? There was silence at first. Not the kind of silence you get with a bad connection. This was heavy, almost thick. I nearly hung up when I heard it. A faint inhale. You need to listen. My throat grew dry. The voice was scratchy, distorted, like it was coming through layers of static. But I knew it. I'd know that voice anywhere. My uncle. I sat, frozen, spoon clattering onto my plate. Uncle Ray? The line hissed, a rush of white noise, before words cut through. They're coming. You don't have much time. My heart pounded. Who's coming? What are you talking about? But the call ended. Just a flat, empty dial tone. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever. The name had vanished. Call history showed nothing. No incoming number, no record at all. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every creak of my old apartment sounded like footsteps. Every shadow stretched too long across the walls. At one point, I even pulled out the photo album my mom had given me after the funeral. There he was, Ray, smiling on the porch with a beer in hand, his eyes crinkling the way they always did when he was about to tell a joke. He was gone. I was sure of it. I'd carried his coffin myself. So how did his number call me? The next morning, I tried to be rational. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe I had dreamed it, or maybe my phone glitched. Technology isn't perfect. Still, as I drove to work, I couldn't shake the sound of his voice. Urgent, desperate. That single line replayed in my head on a loop. They're coming. You don't have much time.
The story should be written in a ghostly tone, so terrifying that anyone reading it will feel fear. By lunch, I had almost convinced myself to forget it until my phone buzzed again. Same ringtone, same name on the screen. My hands trembled so badly, I nearly dropped it. I let it ring this time, heart hammering in my chest. The call went to voicemail, but when I checked, There was nothing. No missed call, no voicemail, no record. It was like the phone itself was trying to gaslight me. That night, I locked every door and window, something I never usually bothered with. I even dragged a chair under the knob of my bedroom door like I'd seen in movies. And then I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the next call. It never came. But just as I was about to drift into uneasy sleep, I heard it, soft, muffled, as though coming from the kitchen. That ringtone, the sound of a dead man calling me from 7 years in the grave.
I didn't go into work the next day. How could I? My body felt heavy, like I'd run miles the night before, when, in truth, I'd barely moved from my bed. My hand shook every time I held my phone, terrified it would buzz again with that impossible ringtone. The message still sat on my screen. It's closer than you think. At first I considered deleting it, pretending it wasn't there, but my thumb hovered over the screen and froze, because part of me was terrified that if I erased it, I'd erase evidence that any of this was even real. So, I left it. By mid-morning, I convinced myself to call my mom. She had been Ray's sister, and they were close, closer than any of us. If anyone could ease this gnawing fear, maybe she could. She picked up on the second ring. "Honey, everything okay?" I swallowed, realizing how crazy this was about to sound. "Mom, did you ever keep Ray's old phone?" There was a pause, the kind of pause that makes you picture someone frowning on the other end. "No, we buried him with it. You remember, don't you? You insisted on slipping that photo of you two into the case." My chest tightened. I did remember. I had slid a little Polaroid into the back of his phone case before the funeral. Him holding me on his shoulders when I was 7, both of us grinning like idiots. So if the phone had been buried, how could anyone be calling me from it? "Why are you asking?" my mom pressed gently. I hesitated. I thought I saw something. Forget it. But of course she didn't forget it. She worried. Mothers always do. "Sweetheart, you sound tired. Promise me you're resting, okay? Don't overwork yourself. Sometimes stress does funny things to the mind." Stress. That was the word she gave me to cling to. A lifeline of rationality. Maybe that was all this was. Stress, grief I hadn't fully processed, the loneliness of too many nights in an empty apartment. I almost believed it, until later that evening. I was heating up dinner when the lights flickered, just once, like the building's wiring hiccuped. My apartment is old, creaky floors, thin walls where you can hear neighbors arguing through the plaster, but the lights had never flickered like that before. I set my fork down, listening, and then it came, the buzz of my phone on the counter, that ringtone. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't even want to look, but some primal instinct dragged my eyes down to the glowing screen. Uncle Ray. The air felt heavier, pressing against my skin. My hands moved on their own, trembling as I picked it up. "Hello?" My voice cracked. This time there was no delay. The voice came immediately, rougher than before, like the static was tearing it apart. "You're not safe."
There was breathing on the other end, heavy, uneven. And then, almost like he was right there in the room with me. "They're in the walls." My knees buckled. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. Who's in the walls?" But the line went dead. Silence swallowed the apartment. I don't know how long I stood there, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly deafening. Every creak of the building sounded like movement. Every shadow seemed to shift in my periphery. I grabbed a flashlight and checked the walls. the outlets, even the vents. Nothing. Just dust, chipped paint, and the faint smell of mildew. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, I dreamed of Ray. He was sitting in his old armchair, the one my mom threw out after the funeral. The room around him was dark, but his face glowed in the same soft way it always did when he told stories. Except this time, his eyes didn't crinkle. They were wide, unblinking. "You shouldn't have answered," he whispered. I woke up drenched in sweat, gasping. My phone was buzzing on the nightstand. Same ringtone. I almost hurled it across the room, but instead, my shaking fingers swiped to answer. "Uncle Ray?" My voice was a croak. Static. A long stretch of it. Then, one clear word cutting through like a knife. "Basement." I bolted upright. "Basement? What basement?" The call cut out again. No explanation. I sat in the dark for hours trying to understand. My apartment didn't have a basement, at least not one I'd ever been to. But the building itself, maybe. It was a pre-war brick structure with peeling paint and rusting fire escapes, the kind of place that definitely had a forgotten storage level or two. By morning, exhaustion gnawed at me, but curiosity and fear drove me downstairs. I found the superintendent sweeping the front hallway. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, "does this building have a basement?" He glanced up, suspicious, like I'd asked something I shouldn't. "Why you asking?" I forced a laugh. "Just wondering. I thought I heard something last night. Maybe a raccoon." He shook his head slowly. "Locked up. Nobody goes down there. Old pipes, rats the size of cats. You don't want to see it." But the way his eyes flickered told me there was more to the story. I didn't press. Not then. That evening, I called a friend, Eli. I hadn't seen him in weeks, but he was the kind of guy who thrived on ghost stories and urban legends. Maybe he'd laugh. Maybe he'd give me a rational explanation. Anything was better than sitting alone with this nightmare. When he came over, I told him everything. The calls, the texts, the word basement. I expected him to grin and call me crazy. Instead, he frowned. Numbers don't just resurface themselves, man. If it's not some sick prank, then maybe it's something else. Something else? I asked. He lowered his voice, like the walls might hear. There's this belief that when someone dies, suddenly, violently, or with unfinished business, their energy can linger. Sometimes it finds ways to communicate. I laughed nervously. Through cell service? But Eli didn't laugh. He leaned closer. What if it's not Ray calling? What if it's something using him to get your attention? The words lodged in my chest like ice. That night, when Eli left, I sat alone in the silence of my apartment. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at my phone, waiting for it to buzz again. And when it finally did, I didn't even hesitate. I answered. The voice that greeted me wasn't my uncle's this time. It was deeper, sharper, and it said my name.
When I heard my name spoken in that voice, low, sharp, nothing like Uncle Ray's, something inside me twisted. It wasn't just hearing it. It was the way it was said, drawn out, almost savoring, like whoever, whatever was on the other end had been waiting for me. I didn't answer right away. My tongue felt like sandpaper. "Who is this?" I finally forced out. Static crackled, filling the silence. Then came laughter, dry, brittle, like wood snapping in a fire. And then, almost in a whisper. Basement. The call cut. I sat frozen on the edge of my bed, staring at the phone in my hand. My reflection stared back at me in the black screen, pale and wide-eyed. For a long time, I didn't move, didn't even breathe. It wasn't Uncle Ray anymore, that much I knew. But why use his number? Why use his voice before? And why drag me into it? The next day, I forced myself back into routine. Work, coffee, pretending to laugh at coworkers' small talk. But I kept my phone on silent, face down on my desk, like covering my ears to a monster hiding under the bed. It didn't help, because every time I looked up at the clock, the hands seemed to blur. And for the briefest moment, I swore I heard that ringtone faintly in the distance, like it was bleeding into my world from somewhere else. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to go back downstairs and find the basement. The super wasn't around, and no one stopped me as I crept down the narrow stairwell behind the lobby. The air grew colder with every step, damp and stale. At the bottom, I found a heavy metal door chained shut with a rusted padlock. A faded sign above it read, "Authorized personnel only." I stood there for what felt like an hour, staring at that lock. Something in me screamed to turn back. Another part whispered, "If Ray's trying to warn you, this is where the truth is." But I didn't have a key, and I wasn't about to break into a locked basement in daylight. Not yet. That night, I dreamed again. Uncle Ray stood in the same chair. Only this time, the room around him was lit by a single swinging bulb. Behind him, the shadows stretched long and distorted, shapes moving just beyond clarity. He said, "Don't go down there," his voice raw. I wanted to reach out, to ask him what he meant, but when I took a step closer, his face began to melt. His jaw slackened, his eyes hollowed out, and the voice that came out wasn't his anymore. "Come closer." I jolted awake, heart hammering. My phone was buzzing on the nightstand. The dead number. Hands trembling, I answered. "Ray, please, just tell me what's happening." The line hissed, and then, layered over static, I heard both voices, the familiar rasp of my uncle and the sharp, cold voice from before, speaking at once, overlapping, tearing at each other. One said, "Stay away." The other whispered, "It's already here." The phone went dead. I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and bolted outside into the night air. I drove aimlessly for hours, just circling highways until exhaustion forced me to pull into a gas station lot. For the first time in days, my phone was silent. The next morning, I called my mom again. My voice shook. When I asked, "Did Ray ever mention the basement at the old house, at Grandma's?" There was a long pause. Too long. "Why are you asking about that?" she said finally. Her voice was careful, like stepping over glass. "Because I keep hearing things. I keep getting calls. From him. From his number." She didn't laugh. She didn't scold me for being ridiculous. Instead, she sighed. "I hoped you wouldn't get dragged into this." My stomach flipped. Dragged into what? When Ray was young, he used to play in the basement at Grandma's house. But strange things happened down there. He swore he heard voices in the walls. At night, he'd come upstairs shaking, saying something down there was calling his name. My parents thought he was just imaginative, but he wasn't.
I gripped the phone tighter. What happened? By the time you were born, Ray never set foot down there again. He told me once, just once, that if he died before me, I should never, ever go into a basement alone. Her voice broke slightly. And now you're asking me this. God help us. The line went quiet, except for her faint breathing. I didn't know what to say. A cold certainty crept over me. This wasn't just my imagination. Something had followed my uncle. Something he'd tried to warn me about, even in death. And now, it wanted me. That night, Eli came back over. He'd brought a six-pack, trying to lighten the mood. But the second he saw my face, the jokes died on his lips. "You look like hell, man," he muttered. "I think something's in the basement. Not just here. My family's. Ray's house. It's all connected." He studied me for a long time, then nodded slowly. "So we find out." I shook my head violently. "No, my mom said to stay away." Eli leaned forward. "Look, if this thing is real, ignoring it isn't going to help. You've already opened the door. You answered the call."